Hello, this is Miss Howell, and I would like to talk to you about how to memorize your different categories for competition. Here are the categories I'm going to address. I'm going to group all of the Bibles together because you're going to use the same steps for all of those, and the same goes for speeches and for music. So let's get started. Again, because the steps are overlapping, I'm going to demonstrate using this card. I showed it on my last video, but I'll walk you through the steps that I personally used, and hopefully that will be a help to you. With Bible memory, when you go to memorize the verses, what you could do is read through the verse a few times and look away, see if you can say part of it from memory, and then go back, refresh your memory, and do it again. Look away and try to see how much you can do. If you say that might be a lot, for me, some of the verse cards have like 7 verses on them, and so work a phrase at a time and be like, okay, looking at the example here, take the phrase "for what is a man profited." Read through that, looking at it, because when you're looking at it and speaking it out loud, you're seeing it, you're hearing it, and you're speaking it. And the more senses you can get involved, the easier it will be to memorize the verse. So go through the phrase, say it until you're confident, and make sure as you're saying it, you're giving yourself opportunities to look away, see how much you can do for memory. Once you're confident with that phrase, move into the next phrase. And once you're confident with that phrase, go back to the beginning of the verse and go all the way through the point that you've memorized. And then keep going through that verse that way. And I think that will help you out a lot. Once you get a certain number, once you get a number of verses memorized, even if you don't have all of them memorized, I know for my family sometimes it took us a while to get all of them memorized, but once you have a few memorized, take them to somebody and say, hey, can you give me a reference? I'm going to try to say this verse. If I make a mistake, please mark it on the card because I'm going to go back and review it. And so have them put up a blocker between you and the card so that you're not getting a sneak peek at what you're trying to say. And if you can't think of the verse right away, practice asking for the caption because they are allowed to give that in the first round. And so if they give a reference, you can't think of it, ask for the caption. Try to say the verse. If it doesn't work out as well as you would like, go back and review the verse and iron out the rough parts of it. The second round is they give you the caption and you have to supply the verse and the reference and the verse. There are 2 ways you can practice both the verse part and the giving the reference part. You could either write it out or say it out loud. And if you do write it, always pay attention to the capitalization and the punctuation because both are important when you are practicing. If it does go to a written test, capitalization and punctuation are crucial to how that round will be graded. And so I would pay special attention to that if you write it out. With New and Old Testament testing, I would use the same steps to memorize if you're serious about memory work. You don't necessarily need to know chapter and verse, just know what goes in the chapter, and then that's pretty much, obviously if it's a verse that's very familiar, you should know the chapter verse, but other than that, I wouldn't necessarily worry about which is which. All right. We're talking about National Bible Quizzing right now. And with National Bible Quizzing, I would be very specific with what verse goes with what chapter. And so if it's a really long chapter and you're trying to memorize the whole chapter, break up the chapter into 2 parts and using the steps that you would use for a Bible category, take it a verse at a time. Once you get one verse down, move to the next verse. Once you get that verse down, go back to the first verse and work your way through. Obviously, if it's a long chapter, break it up into several different segments And then once you've ironed out all the segments, try to put it all together, because the more you can make that connection in your brain of what chapter is what, that will help you know how to answer the questions. Now we're going to move on to the speeches, and I would recommend standing and reading through your speech. If you have something to put your speech on so that you can stand straight and tall and still read it, go ahead and add in your motions and your vocal inflection and really make your speech come alive even in your practice, because the more senses you can get involved, kind of like what I mentioned for Bible memory, the more senses you can get involved, the easier it will be to memorize your speech. Once you're confident with, maybe you're working on a certain section in your speech, look away from your script and see how much you can remember on your own. Obviously, if you're just starting out, there are going to be parts where you're going to have to look back at your script to figure out, okay, where was I going? Pick up your train of thought and keep moving forward. But there should come a point in time where you can give the paper copy to someone else to check, and as you're going through it, make sure you're not looking over their shoulder, because when you're presenting it at competition, you won't have somebody, it'll be the judges, and they won't help you unless you are absolutely stuck. And if you make a mistake, then go ahead and have them circle it. They could underline it. If you've missed it a lot of times, they could star it or use pen. And then go back and check and see, okay, how close did I get to word perfect? If you keep messing it up and it's very close to competition time, just get the file of the speech and edit it to what you've been saying, and then hopefully that will help you out with that as well. With spelling, practice safe spell saying the words. You could also write them out. Have somebody dictate the word to you and write it out. Check the spelling. Obviously, if you mistake the spelling, go back and either safe spell say it again or write it out. And the more you familiarize yourself with the correct spelling, the better you'll be able to do. And I've kind of mentioned this already. Practice with a spell checker. Once you're confident with the words, give your list or the cards or whatever you're using to another person and say, hey, can you read a word? I'm going to spell it. Can you check and make sure I'm spelling it correctly? And I think that will help you out a lot as well. With music, play through it, and the more you play through it, you're going to get the feel for the big picture. But then you also need to work on the inside of the big picture, all the little pictures that go with it. And so either work a measure or a phrase at a time. And it's kind of like what I mentioned with Bible memory. Work one measure or a phrase, whatever is more comfortable for you. Work it until you know you can do it from memory. Then go to the next measure or the phrase and work on that phrase or measure, and then go back and see how well you can do it all together. And just keep doing that all the way throughout the piece. If you do it by, if it's a hymn and you have 2 or 3 different verses, then work one verse and then put that one verse aside, work on the second verse. And then once you've done the second verse, maybe go back and see if you can put it all together. And then work the third verse all by itself and then put it all back together. And maybe that will help you with that. And I've kind of mentioned that. And so in conclusion, practice makes perfect. And so I would recommend making sure your practice counts, because you can run through it and kind of be a little sloppy and you're like, okay, well, this is enough. And most of the time, some of the time it might not be. Practice takes work, and you have to work hard to make it count. I would speak through each speech at least twice daily, but once it's memorized, probably no more than 5 times a day, unless you're memorizing it. And then I would work on either specific sections, or if you're having trouble with a speaker's voice, go through and just highlight that one speaker's lines, and maybe that will help you with that. Once music is memorized, play through it at least twice daily. If you do find trouble spots, go back and work on the trouble spots, and then just keep working, and balance it out. You don't want to do it too much, because then you won't be able to focus on you can focus too hard on it and keep making mistakes. And if you find that that's happening, take a break from it and come back to it another day. And I hope this helps, and I look forward to hearing what happens.